Shawnee, aka Total Makeup Junkie 101. So today I have a video that has been a long time coming. I don't know why I didn't make this video sooner because this is a product that I have been using and loving for at least a year now. And you guys know how I usually am with my review videos. I like to be on top of the newest, latest, and greatest releases. And even though this is not a new release, it is one of the best products in my makeup collection, so I had to talk about it. I am talking about my VISEART eyeshadow palettes. Lots of other YouTubers have talked about the VISEART eyeshadow palettes, and I personally have also talked about them in quite a few different favorites videos. This palette in particular did make it as my best of 2016 eye product. And since I've been loving and using my VISEART eyeshadow palettes for so long now, I thought, you know what, I have quite a few of them. I actually think I own all of them. So I do think it's about time I sit down and actually film a full review and swatch video. You guys know I will do full palette swatches. I will also do a full price breakdown because I know the price is what really stops a lot of people from testing these palettes. As of when I'm filming this video, VISEART has 3 different types of eyeshadow palettes. They have their larger palettes that look like this that have 12 different shadows in them. They also have these smaller, more travel-friendly palettes that they call their Theory palettes that have 6 full-size shadows. And then they have a Petit PRO palette is what it's called. It only comes in 1 shade, but it has 8 different colors in a mini pan. So let me go ahead and start off the review by talking about these larger VISEART palettes. I own 9 different versions of this large VISEART palette, which just goes to show you how much I love them. First off, let's go ahead and talk about the packaging. The packaging is very, very standard. It does come in a thick plastic packaging with a clear top and then just a black back with a sticker. I know a lot of people really dislike the packaging because from the outside, I mean, it doesn't look very expensive, especially given the price of it, but I do like it because these are meant to be makeup artist palettes. So it's always nice when you have a bunch of these to be able to see all of the colors from the front. And then in terms of the actual layout of shadows, you can see there are 12 rectangular pans. It's very, very sleek, travel friendly. I travel with this palette quite a bit, and I can definitely say with complete and total honesty, even though the packaging may not look super fancy or extravagant or unique by any means, it is very durable. I've traveled with this palette on countless occasions. I've taken it all the way to New York and back, and it has completely and totally held up. Another thing I want to mention about these larger VISEART palettes, which could be a make or break for some people, is that they tend to put the same finish in the palettes. For example, any palette that has a matte finish is matte all across the board, or any palette that has like a shimmery or satin finish is shimmery all across the board. You're not really getting a mix of textures to play with within each of the palettes. Once again, that could be a make or break for some of you guys. I don't mind that because I tend to pull in other palettes on occasion as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the swatches of all 9 of the larger eyeshadow palettes that I have from VISEART. But as I go through them, I also just want to give you guys an overview of what I think of each of the palettes in terms of color selection. So this palette I've been holding up here is my #1 favorite VISEART palette. This is the palette I will 110% repurchase. It's probably going to be the first one that I even go through because I use it all the time. I don't think I mentioned it, but this is the #1 neutral matte palette. It looks very basic, but that's the thing that I love about it, is that I am able to pull it into any eye look, and I can also use this by itself if I just want a nice neutral matte eye look. So here are swatches of the entire neutral matte eyeshadow palette. You can see that there are some really great highlight colors, mid-tone transition colors, and then of course you're getting your dark brown and your matte dark black to really help round the palette out. Next up, I want to discuss one of the newest VISEART palettes that I purchased. This one is the number 10 Warm Matte palette. Now this is a palette that I was so excited to see. We all know that warm eyeshadow colors are really, really trendy right now, and I just knew that VISEART would just kick butt with these warm colors over here. So here are swatches of the entire warm matte palette. You can see that you are getting some lighter colors. There are a lot of mid-tone colors in this palette, and then of course you're getting kind of like that rusty red, rusty orange, and that bright canary yellow. The next palette we will go ahead and discuss is the number 7 Cool Matte palette. Now this is another palette I've had for quite a while. Now this is one of the few palettes that isn't completely matte. Even though it's called Cool Mattes, there are some more like satiny finish colors in this palette mixed in with some very, very true mattes. Here are swatches of the Cool Mattes palette. So you can see there are a nice mix of light shades and dark shades in this palette. Pretty much everything leans very cool. There are some purples, there are some pinks, there are a lot of grays and blues, and I really, really like this palette a lot. Next up, I want to discuss the dark matte palette number 4. This is probably, I'm gonna just say, the most unique VISEART palette that I have in my entire collection. This is a selection of all matte colors that are all this very unique jewel toned dark tone. There are definitely some shades in this palette that I have nothing else like in my collection, like this almost like yellowy color, this like matte army green. I love these berry purples over here. There are just some beautiful shades. So here are swatches of the dark mattes palette. So you can see, of course, everything is pretty much mid-tone to dark in tone, and I like that you're getting a nice mix of both warm reddish orangey colors as well as some cool like purples and blues as well. The final all matte palette I want to discuss is the number 8 Bright Editorial palette. Now this is another one that I think is fairly unique. I know there are some other bright neon palettes like the Urban Decay Electric palette that many of us already own, but this is very unique because every single shade in this palette is completely matte. So here are swatches of the Bright Editorial palette. You can see that this is such an interesting, unique palette. I love the bright pops of colors. It's just so radiant. I love it. Okay, now there are 4 larger eyeshadow palettes that all have kind of a shimmery or metallic finish to them. So I'm gonna go ahead and start off with this one. This is the number 2 Boheme Dream, I believe is how it's pronounced. And in my eyes, this is almost like the metallic shimmery version of the Editorial Bright palette. Here are swatches of the Boheme Dream palette. You can see every single color is shimmery, every single color is super vibrant, super bright, and this palette overall does lean quite cool toned. Even those pinks are kind of blue toned fuchsia pinks. Next, let's talk about the number 3 Bridal palette. Now this is a really gorgeous, fairly cool toned shimmery eye palette, and you're getting a lot of like these purples and blues and a lot of kind of neutrally shades as well. So here are swatches of the Bridal palette. Like I said, everything shimmery. I do really, really like this palette. I think that shimmer is not overly metallic in most of the shades, at least. It's almost like a slight satin finish. The next palette we're going to talk about is the number 5 Sultry Nudes. Now this is probably one of my favorite palettes because it is another nude neutral palette, but all of the colors have a slight satin finish. Here are swatches of the Sultry Nudes palette. So you can see that the majority of the colors do lean quite warm. You kind of have like those orangey golden tones, and there's a lot of true mid-tone shades. There's not a ton of dark in this palette. And then the final palette I want to talk about is the number 6. I don't know the name of this one. I think it might be called Paris Nudes or something, but I could be wrong. But this is what this one looks like. It is another all satin or shimmery palette, but this one definitely leans more taupey. So here are swatches of the number 6 palette. You can see how beautiful this palette is. Every single color, I would say, definitely stays in that mid-tone family. You're not getting anything too dark or anything too light. Alrighty, so now that I showed you guys swatches of all of the larger VISEART palettes I have, let me go ahead and talk about the texture of these shadows, and then I will show you guys swatches of the smaller palettes that I have. So first off, I want to discuss the matte formula. VISEART matte shadows are the best matte eyeshadows I have ever used. These are super smooth, very finely milled, but they don't kick up too much powder. They're very easy to blend. They're absolutely effortless on the eyes. This is the perfect matte formula for a beginner or someone who's still kind of getting used to blending their shadows, because these blend effortlessly, but they don't get too muddy either. They are just beautiful. VISEART really excels with their matte formula, and I think that is where the strength of the brand lies. But I definitely wouldn't roll your eyes at these shimmery ones either. Now, the shimmer finishes that are in these larger palettes are a little different than the ones I'm going to talk about in these smaller palettes over here. But in these larger palettes, the shimmers are more of like a beautiful reflective metallic, but they don't have any glitter. They're not too thick or too creamy. They're kind of like a slightly thinned out Makeup Geek foiled shadow. I do really like these shimmers as well. Now, if you're looking for a super intense, super reflective shadow, these might not be for you. These are more for the person who wants something shimmery on their eyes, but maybe has some lines around your eyes and you feel like shimmery shadows emphasize that too much. Or if you're trying to look for something very work appropriate, if you work in like a hospital or a corporate office and you're not looking for something that makes your eyes look like a disco ball, but you still want something slightly reflective, I definitely think you want to look into these shimmers. Out of all of these large palettes that I've showed you guys today, the ones I would highly recommend, I mean, obviously I was going to talk about this one, the Neutral Matte #1 palette. I've used it to death. I love it to death. If you don't have a good basic neutral matte palette, buy this and thank me later. Now, if you're looking for something a little bit more unique, or you think you already have all of your basic mattes and you want something different, I would definitely get the dark matte palette. This one is very interesting, and even though I wouldn't say this is necessarily a palette you can use all by itself, it's definitely a great palette to pull in with any other eyeshadow singles, or like your Urban Decay Naked palette, or any other palette you already have that you want to add a little bit of a color twist to. And then in terms of the shimmery palettes, my actual favorite shimmery palette that they have is the number 6, the one that I'm not sure the name of. But this one is just gorgeous. I have some of these colors on my eyes today. I also have some colors from the Warm Matte palette, as well as, of course, my Neutral Matte palette. That's what I have on my eyes today. Now let's go ahead and jump right into discussing these smaller, more compact VISEART palettes. Now, if the idea of purchasing one large palette all with the same actual eyeshadow finish in it is not very appealing to you, and you want a palette that has some shimmers as well as some mattes in it, you might want to look into these little palettes, because in these you are getting one row of mattes as well as one row of shimmers. These little palettes are called the Theory palettes, and they are really cute. They have like a slightly rubbered textured finish on the outside, and then they kind of like pop open like this. And then, like I said, mattes over here, shimmers over here. The other unique thing about this palette is that you can actually pop out the individual eyeshadow pans, because they're just magnetized into this palette. So if you wanted to go ahead and put them into a Z palette or any other type of magnetic palette, you could definitely do that. VISEART has 3 different shades of their Theory palettes available, and of course I have all 3 to show you guys today. So this first shade right here is called #1 Cashmere, and this is definitely the most cool toned neutral one. Here are swatches of the Cashmere palette. So you can see the first 3 colors are matte, the last 3 are shimmery. I really like this palette a lot. I like that you're getting a matte white, a matte transition color, and then a matte dark brown to really complement all 3 of those shimmer colors. The next Theory palette we're gonna go ahead and discuss is the number 2 Minx. Now this is my favorite, and it's also the one I've used the most. I absolutely adore this palette. Again, you have the mattes over here, the shimmers over here. This is definitely more of a neutral, mid-tone, warm palette. Here are swatches of the Minx palette. So you can see the first 3 shades are matte, the last 3 shades are shimmery. I absolutely love that first light shimmery color. I always pack that all over my lid. And then the final Theory palette we are going to discuss is the number 3 Chroma palette. Now this is the one I've used the least because you can see it's a really dark, very cool toned, smoky palette. You have the mattes over here and then the shimmers over here. Here are swatches of the Chroma palette. Now this is an ideal palette if you are looking for an effortless smoky eye because you get a very bright white and a very dark black, and then you get all of those perfect cool toned silvery gray shimmery colors. Now out of the 3 Theory palettes, of course my favorite was number 2 Minx. Like I already said, it is the most perfect warm toned neutral look, and I love that you get the chance to try the mattes and the shimmers. Now I do want to say that the shimmers that are in these palettes are quite a bit different than the shimmers that are in these larger palettes. These shimmers are a lot denser and they are a lot more metallic. These really remind me a lot more of a true Makeup Geek foiled shadow because they have that really creamy, dense, buttery texture that just deposits so much pigment and so much color on the eyes. Whereas the shimmers in this large palette are a lot more effortless and a little bit more like satin looking. The shimmers that are in these Theory palettes are just bam, in your face. They are bright, they are bold, they are gorgeous. And the mattes in these palettes really do remind me of the mattes in the larger palettes. They're just beautiful, super finely milled, very easy to blend. I love these. All right, and the final VISEART eyeshadow palette I want to discuss is the Petit Pro palette. So I'll just go ahead and show you guys the size comparison next to one of the Theory palettes. It is a little bit smaller. And then just as a size comparison next to a full-size palette, once again, quite a bit smaller and a little bit thinner as well. The Petit Pro palette has the same kind of, you know, roundabout closure that the Theory palettes have. It does have a little mirror up here, which is kind of cute. And then you are getting 8 shadows, all of which are in a mini size. Once again, these pans are really easy to pop in and out. They are just magnetized into this palette. Another pro to this palette, similar to the Theory palettes, is that you are getting 1 row of mattes and 1 row of shimmers. As of right now, VISEART only has this 1 color available in their Petit Pro palette. It's just called the number 1, and it is a fairly warm toned neutral palette. Here are swatches of all 8 of the colors you get in the Petit Pro palette. The first 4 shades are matte, the last 4 shades are shimmery, and I really do like the colors that they chose to include both in the matte section as well as in the shimmery section. The texture and quality of this Petit Pro palette is the exact same thing as the Chroma palettes, so the mattes are exactly what you would expect from a VISEART matte. Super creamy, blendable, pigmented, everything I've already said 18 times now. And these shimmers are more of that dense, rich, super metallic shimmery finish. Okay, now that I went through swatches of every single VISEART eyeshadow palette I own, let's go ahead and get into the fun stuff and discuss the price breakdown. So each of these large eyeshadow palettes that have 12 full-size shadows in them retail for $80, which I know sounds like a lot, and that's, I think the #1 reason why people don't jump on these, because the quality is absolutely amazing. I promise you, once you try a VISEART palette, you're gonna have a hard time using anything else. Now, in terms of the actual price breakdown, like I said, you're getting 12 shades in here. Each of these pans holds 2 grams of product, which means you're getting 24 grams total. That breaks down to $3.33 per gram that you are paying for this palette. That's actually very, very reasonable. I went ahead and did a price breakdown on the original Urban Decay Naked palette. I know a lot of us own that palette already, and I just wanted to let you guys know that if you own the Urban Decay Naked palette, you paid $54 for 16.92 grams of product, which means that you paid $3.19 per gram. So you're paying $3.19 per gram for that palette and $3.33 per gram for this palette. So it's not very much more expensive when you break it down per gram. Once again, I know $80 upfront is a really hefty price tag to swallow, but these are definitely those types of palettes that I would say are definitely worth your time in investing. Trust me, I completely and totally understand that investing such a high amount in a single eyeshadow palette is not going to be for everybody. I totally understand that. But if you guys wanted to make the investment, just to put this into a little bit of perspective for you guys, if you guys put aside $10 a week for the next 8 weeks, you can afford this palette. That means that for the next 2 months, if you guys were to forego 2 Starbucks drinks a week, so instead of getting Starbucks 5 or 7 times a week, cut it down to getting Starbucks 3 to 5 times a week, save that $10 a week, and in the next 2 months, you can actually afford one of these. And trust me when I say that these palettes will definitely last you longer than a Starbucks drink. But that's just my little tip, or my little budget tip for you guys if you did want to save up for one of those palettes. Now, let's go ahead and break down the value of these Theory palettes. So these Theory palettes cost $45, so just a little bit more than half of a full palette, and you are getting 6 shades in here, but all of these shades are full size. So each one of these pans is the same exact size as each one of these pans. You're getting 6 shades at 2 grams a piece, which means you are getting 12 grams of product total in this palette, which means that you are paying $3.75 per gram for these palettes. That means that you are paying a little bit more of a premium on these palettes than you are the larger palettes, which makes sense because usually when you buy something in bulk or in a larger quantity, it's going to be a little bit cheaper than buying it in a smaller quantity. And finally, let's go ahead and do a price breakdown on the Petit Pro palette. Now, this palette actually surprised me quite a bit in value. So you're going to pay $30 for this Petit Pro palette. You're getting 8 different shades, and each of these pans hold 1.5 grams, which is quite a bit of product. Even though they look really small, they are 3/4 of the size of a full-size pan of shadow. And because you're getting 8 shades at 1.5 grams a piece, that means that you are getting 12 grams of product total. That means that you are paying $2.50 per gram for this Petit Pro palette, which is an absolute steal. I mean, $2.50 per gram, $3.33 per gram. I'm actually really shocked because you get a mix of shimmers and mattes. They are just as good as the full-size palettes, and you're getting the ability to try a bunch of really wearable, nice colors. Alrighty guys, we are pretty much wrapping this video up. There are a couple of last housekeeping things I wanted to talk about. First off, VISEART is a French brand, so all of these palettes are made in France. The #1 ingredient in these shadows is talc, followed by mica. Now, that is something that some people have had a little bit of a problem with. Honestly, I think if the product works and performs, it works. I do know that talc is a relatively inexpensive filler type product, and a lot of, I guess, let's just say mass-produced palettes contain a lot of talc in them as well. But I will promise you, these do not perform the same way as Morphe shadows. These do not perform the same way as Dollar Tree shadows. These do not perform the same way as MAC shadows. These are superior. I'm not just saying that because they're expensive. They are genuinely superior. And then the final point I wanted to hit on is availability. I purchase most of my palettes from musebeautypro.com. However, I know that these are also available at Sephora. I don't know if they're available in stores, but I know for sure they're available on Sephora.com. So I will go ahead and put links to where you can purchase these in the description box below for you. And FYI, I purchased all of this with my own money. Not a single palette was sent to me. I purchased them all because I love them so much. Alrighty guys, so that wraps up my complete VISEART eyeshadow palette review video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys are curious to see a follow-up review on the VISEART blush palettes that I recently picked up from IMAX, just let me know in the comments down below and I can definitely do that for you. I didn't want to include it in this video because I know this video is already way too long. So if I added the blushes, it would just be insane. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to thumbs this up, subscribe, share it with your friends or family, anybody who is interested in these palettes. I really hope the swatches were helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys in my next video on Monday. I will see you then. Bye! It was really exciting for me because I love both of these brands. I love Too Faced and I love Kat Von D. And we just came back from IMAX LA 2017 and we have